How much did you spend on DoorDash? How many freaking $8 IPAs did you have tipping people? How many times do you take an Uber because you don't want to sit on the bus because you feel some kind of way about that? All that is the dollars that you could have deployed into your own education, your own future security, but you won't because you're waiting for the company to pay for it. That don't make no sense. There's not going to be room for people like that because the younger people are hungrier. Like, yeah, every few years you got to reinvent because like Google knocks these stuff out. This thing don't work. That thing don't work anymore.
Influential and thought-provoking minds in marketing, sales, and business. The Business of Marketing Podcast.
Welcome again to the Business of Marketing. I'm A. Lee Judge. After crossing paths and stages with today's guest, I finally got a few minutes to chat with him last year at the B2B Marketing Profs Conference. And attending his sessions and keynotes, I came to admire his excitement for data, for doing the hard work of determining what's next, and then, most importantly, sharing all that with us. I also came to admire him for his generosity, not only generosity for sharing his knowledge, but for his humanity and caring for people. So I hope today we'll get some of both of those things from him. So welcome to the show today, Wil Reynolds. Hey, Wil.
Hey, how you doing, brother? Thanks for having me.
Doing good. So this is going to be one of those conversations where even before we hit record, we were about to go into some very viable stuff for the audience.
Right.
So
right.
Before I get into it, I don't want to go stereotypically into like a whole bunch of background. Let's just go straight into the meat of this. And first, I want to jump into the type of insights that you bring, and then we'll get back to that. So among several things, you are an expert in SEO, correct?
So I hear.
Yeah. So you hear.
That is bestowed on me by other people.
Exactly. That's how it's supposed to be. And things are changing at an alarming rate. So I'd like to start at a high level and explain to a novice marketer just how much of a shift we're about to experience compared to last 5 years.
Yeah. So I have so many thoughts on this, some of which I haven't shared because I'm careful of the fact that the things that I say have implications. So a lot of times I just sit with my thoughts for a long time, run things through ChatGPT and just talk with that because I'm afraid of putting it out there, not fully formulated, but you're asking questions that are making me be like, I've been thinking about this for 2 or 3 months. First thing is, I've been thinking a lot about agency sizes, and specifically to this is, our agencies big enough to where we're not so big that like, how could I say this? We're not so big that we're slow, but we're not so small that I, as the leader of the company, have no time to work on all this new stuff. And like, there's a real tension there that I'm seeing. Like, if you're too small, you feel like you're always behind. You're like, I actually got to be, so I don't have any direct reports. So when people are like, Wil, how are you able to put out that level, that amount of content at that high of a quality level? I'm like, well, I don't have any direct reports. Like, you got a company where you got one-on-ones, you're going through financial reports to make sure that you're solid this month, this year. You're doing projections, you're doing reviews, you're doing all those things. I'm like, imagine what would happen if you had, if you're at a time of hyper change and you had none of those responsibilities, you might be able to catch up on stuff a little bit faster. And the other thing is, Gary Vee said this, it hit me. He's like, if you had somebody doing your freaking social media, who the freak would you trust? Me and my company, where the CEO is inside of Snapchat all day long, being like, yo, he's like, my fingers are on the phone sending out snaps. I don't have a team that sends out snaps for me. He's like, so I know how quickly the algorithm works, how quickly things are starting to change. And I'm like, there's something to be said when you're so close to fingers on keyboard type that you're like, no. If you're trying to figure out the bridge from SEO and search to generative AI, go look at all the experiments being run by the person sitting in front of you. You know, is it a CEO who had a person, who had a person, who had a person that did the study? Or is it somebody that's like, no, I ripped 100,000 keywords, put them into this, ran this, did that, pivoted it this way, and started getting answers? You're like, who are you going to trust? Right? So luckily, I think the big thing is making space and time, and that is going to be hard. And I have some really harsh advice for people on making time that they're not going to like. But we can get into that a little bit later. I went on a little long there.
Well, that leads me to another question. So I'm in that same boat where I'm running a company, but I'm also hyper inquisitive. I want to try everything. So how do you balance, or what's your advice on, well, let's talk about let's just narrow it down to LLMs, for example. Okay. For me, any given day, I can spend time getting better at one LLM and fine tuning my prompts there, for example, or I can go after the new shiny object and become more of a generalist and say, hey, I know all these things. What's your take on how to balance that?
Ooh, so my wife and I have been going back and forth on this a bit for years on the power of the generalist. So what I
Mhm.
think is that like the more specialized you go, the more there's like it's almost like a hourglass. Like if you're generalist, the beauty is you get to connect dots that like ChatGPT ain't connecting because you know enough of an area. And then
Mhm.
but then you go to like a PR conference and then you go to a search conference, then you go to like a programmatic conference and you're like, oh, I'm stitching together thoughts across all these things. And then I read this book on self-improvement and then I read this book on this. So then you're generalist enough that if you're curious enough, you're going to crush an LLM because it's really good at going deep on a thing. But if
Mhm.
you were to type in, like I've gone deep on how to integrate PPC and SEO data for the last like 8 years, right? You go ahead and ask ChatGPT how to integrate PPC and SEO data, I'm going to smoke it, right? Because I've got an experience across
Mhm.
multiple channels that makes me think differently. If I
Mhm.
just went, oh, I've gotten really good at SEO and all the things and go too deep, then sometimes it's like, well, I got good enough at going deep on SEO as an LLM. So therefore, I like staying kind of generalist and kind of broad and letting things lead me where they lead me. Um, because I think if you just go too deep in one area, you can sometimes get really good at that one thing. And then you'd be surprised in a future update. It's like, well, we read 10,000 posts about people that do the exact same thing you do. So the deeper you go, like, and the more people published on it, the more we know it. But then when you start to be like, well, how does PR and SEO work? They're like, there's only a couple posts out there on it. And they're mostly written by people that are super generic with their so therefore the answers are going to be freaking generic. So when I sit in front of a client and they got their PR team, their SEO team there, you're bringing stuff together in ways they're like, I would never get that out of ChatGPT or Claude or Llama or any of these. And your job is to be like, well, eventually after I publish this and create space for myself being known for this, it's going to start to learn my stuff. So I'm going to have to like reinvent myself again and constantly try to find new ways so that there's distance between the training data and everybody starting to talk about it and me.
Let me split this into two pieces here because I'm hearing two things. So one, there's the human's experience plus AI. That's a differentiator. If you are a biotechnologist, you're going to be able to do better with AI for biotechnology than somebody who's not, right? Then there's the other thing of, okay, let's say you are the biotechnologist and you really know ChatGPT. Do you also go out and try to learn Claude? Do you also try to learn Gemini? So there's two. Let's talk about both of those things, and we'll get back to the expert with the LLM. Let's first talk about the LLM. For example, I'll give you myself as an example. Early adopter of ChatGPT, I went in, I got a library of prompts. I know how to tweak it for what I need to do, way beyond content creation, a lot of analysis and everything else. But I also say, well, Claude may be better at writing something, or maybe I can do better analysis with another LLM. Do I spend the time to start scratching the surface of something else? And this is for the marketer who's in a marketing job, who has a finite amount of time to learn all these things, because there may be another LLM on the scene tomorrow for all we know. How do you decide whether to go to get better at the ones you know, or to say, you know what, I might do analysis and Claude is better at that, or Gemini is better at that. Let me just not go deeper on chat, spend some time on Gemini.
Great question. It depends on how good you need to be.
Hmm. And if it's
Like,
your job, maybe, or.
it depends on how good you need to be at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, my job, it's critical because my job is to evangelize and kind of help to educate. So
Mm-hmm.
therefore, I need to know instantly, oh, you don't want to put that prompt in a Gemini 2.0 because it da 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 da. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
you want to do that in this because of this, that. And that's how I show my expertise to my market, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm producing day-to-day stuff, then my job is to basically, I would do, this is hard though. What you want to do is, if it was me, let's say I just defaulted to ChatGPT for everything, right? It's not a problem. But I would have like a week, maybe every quarter, where I put those same prompts. I would be indexing the prompts that didn't really work as well as I hoped they did in ChatGPT for whatever reason. And I'm good at that. So I can kind of intuit like, oh, I know how to write that prompt to get ChatGPT. And you're like, damn, that didn't work. Damn, that didn't work. I would index those, run them once a quarter in other LLMs, and see like, oh, well, they're not doing it good either. But then you know when you're like, ooh, I need to hop over to this LLM for this specific thing. The other thing I would recommend to folks is on this tool I've been talking about for probably about a year now. It's called Poe, POE.com, and Poe has all the models. And what's beautiful about Poe is I can put a prompt in on ChatGPT 4.0 and then click a button and have it run in Claude, click a button, have it run in Llama, click a button, have it run in 3.5, click a button, have it run in 3.5 Turbo. Then when it's done, you use your favorite LLM to go compare the answers to all the different LLMs that it just had, because I'm looking for my tone to sound like this or this. And it'll be like, oh, this one did best for this thing on this instance, right? So the beauty is you can, not only can you run across all the LLMs, you then can pick one of them to analyze all the previous threads of all the LLMs and judge which one they thought it did the best job of. And it's so fast because it's one click. You still got to put the prompt into ChatGPT, right? So you're going to do that either way. But when you're testing models, the best thing to do is just you go into Poe, paste in your prompt, and then once it runs, you just click the next one and it runs. You click the next one and it runs. And then you're like, what about Mistral? I've heard about that. Click it, it runs. I heard they launched a new Mistral yesterday. Click Mistral, whatever, and it runs. And then you're like, all right, how did Mistral this compare to the one here? And how did that compare to GPT? And now you're just in your natural language having it compare the answers to one another.
That's genius. I'm going to check that out because
it's dope.
Like I have this library and I also have things built on it, like other tools integrated with automation. So it's like, you know what?
That's different.
I have to weigh what is the value of the change. Like if I get 2% improvement, it isn't worth me unplugging it from my automation. But if it's 50% improvement, okay, let's pull one out, put a new one in.
Well said. That's exactly why I was saying, like, it depends on how good you have to be at the task. Certain tasks, I have a ton of latitude. So I'm like, you know what? If I go from if there's a possibility for me to go from a 50% done to a 54% done, is that an improvement? Yes. But is that 4% going to take me a lot of time to get to? And this 50% solution is good enough? Then it's not worth it. And I think everybody, dare I say, everybody should probably have their LLM of choice that they mostly use, and then they make time when they can, maybe once a month or whatever, to look at some of the other ones so they're more educated. But you really can't be hopping from thing to thing to thing because it's hard enough to get good at the one. I couldn't imagine trying to get good consistently at all of them at the same time. It'd be, dare I say, like, you got a job to get done. So you got to be about the job. Like, right? And my job is to evangelize. Therefore, I need to know all of them. But if your job is to produce the content or whatever, or to execute on something that you're trying to get done, if it's working well in the current tool, you got to limit that curiosity time, because all you can go down a rabbit hole and have something come out no better than it was 5 hours ago.
I love that answer, especially for me personally, because that's something I struggle with. Like, am I missing out? I'm having FOMO over the new version of Llama that came out. Like, you know what? Maybe I don't need that for what I do. Maybe I have too many things already built on ChatGPT. And then when I speak to audiences, they ask which one is best. Of course, I want to start with something like, well, which one's best for you? But there's also an element of which one do you already know the most about? Like, can you go deeper where you already are? Or, because I don't want you to pull out of where you're at and start over again just because I said Claude, right?
And to your point, ChatGPT is an OS. So I'm starting to be like, these gangsters are an OS. Like, you start linking together a bunch of custom GPTs, you start running certain things that you've learned in through automations like Make and whatnot. You do not want to pull off of that to go to some manual stuff running Claude or Llama. And it might be better, but you're like, well, it might take me more time to get it done now because it doesn't have all the connectors and all the things that I've really gotten good at piecing together.
If I talk to my really geeky computer friends, they may tell me, hey, you should use Linux on your computer operating system. I'm like, well, look, Windows and Mac OS ain't going anywhere. I know if I build on that land, it will likely not go anywhere. But if I build on something that's cool and new, my whole house of cards could fall because something closed or changed.
You know what? I love that analogy because it's my struggle with Windows versus Mac OS, right? Like, the amount of products that I want to install, and it's like, oh, well, you're not on Mac, you can't install that. Like, all these new AI things that come out, you're like, God damn it! Like, I wish I had a Mac. But then for me, my job to be done is not to figure out menus in OSs. That is not my job.
Yeah.
My job is not to figure out, well, what do I hit the Apple key and what for? Like, I already know. It's like Control C, Control this. Now I'm slowing down on every interaction with my keyboard. If my job was to get good at pressing keys, then that's one thing. My job is to use these keys as a tool. So anything that slows me down from doing that, I really got to evaluate. Is that stuff I'm going to learn about Mac? And are those couple AI tools that I can't use going to provide so much value that I should switch my OS and then figure out all the stuff I got to figure about how to use it? Like, that answer right now is nope.
Well, that's a good segue into something I know you're passionate about. I want to talk about is the future of work. Like, the month after I left corporate, I was a marketing operations person at a large company, and I left there, and I think it was like in September or so, and then November, ChatGPT comes out, and immediately I realized the job I just left changed fundamentally. Like, I had spent, for example, every year, I had spent weeks, if not months, analyzing data from trade shows and all the different sources it came from. And I'm like, I can write a prompt to do this now. I could take the boss's email with his 10 questions, turn that email into a prompt, run it, and send it right back to him. That's the change that happened about that time. So marketing operations drastically changed, and I saw that. And so it made me wonder, for those who are still in those positions and those who are looking for new positions, how has that changed the future of work, and how has it changed those who are both in work and those who are looking for work in technology?
I think if you're in work today, you have to have a real honest assessment of how much of your work is a checklist. Step one, how much of my job is executing off of things that I've pretty much done the same way every time for the last 6 times, or the last 5 out of 6 times I did it. And once you do the assessment, then the next question you need to ask yourself is, when am I going to retire? You know, it's like you said before about all these new tools. Like, you can spin yourself up if you're like, or like, do I have a trust fund?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because, you know, for me, I work because it's fun. But for a lot of people, they work for economic security. I understand that, right? So, like, how important is your job to how your family eats? How much of your job today has somebody tried to automate? How many times have you sat in a room and said something couldn't be done, and some punk smartass like me typed the same thing into ChatGPT and was like, I got it 50% built by the time you finish your sentence? You got to take inventory of that kind of stuff. And then based on the inventory of that, you need to adjust accordingly. If you're like, no, I might need to work for another 15, 20 years. Okay, well, then you better be about that life. If you're like, yo, I ain't got no trust fund. Ain't nobody coming to save me. I got to be able to like save myself. All right, well, then you might want to be about this life. Like, you might want to be working at this stuff. And the problem, I think, is, if I'm going to be real, and it's super unpopular, is you can't get better at a thing while you're doing the thing. Like, you got to make time to try new reps. Like, Tiger Woods doesn't get better at golf by just working on golf during golf tournaments. It's like, you got to go and practice. You got to put in reps. Well, you know, I got so much work to do in my marketing ops role. That's a 9-to-5 job pre-AI. Damn right it is. Post-AI, it's a 9-to-5 job still. Well, where am I going to find the time? Oh, you're going to find out when you can't put food on the table 5 or 6 years from now, and somebody's saying, all right, well, we got 20 marketing ops people. Some of them have been building prompts and stuff. We're going to keep them because they're going to bring value. The person that uses the prompt that you built, the person that uses the GPT that you built and ain't never built the GPT, once enough of the roles. So if you got 20 people each working 40-hour weeks, let's just say it's 10 people working 40-hour weeks. I'm bad at math. You have 400 hours to deploy, right? If you automate 10% of that job, then you really only need 9 of them. And who am I going to pick out of the 10 to bail? The ones that built GPTs, the one that tried to build a GPT, or the one that's like, yo, I didn't know you could do that. You're like, what do you mean? Like, you're never going to help make us better. So I'm going to roll with the 9 who do.
Yeah, the one that built multiplied themselves.
They're
multiplying themselves into the seats of the people who did not multiply themselves.
That's what I'm saying. So to me, it's not something that people like to hear. Uh, um, but this is reps. And it's like, you got to do reps. And it's like, but I don't have time. And, I work. And then after work, I got yoga. And before work, I got to, eat my smoothie, and I got to do this, and I need my meditation. It's like, okay, does any of that help you to pay your bills? Does any of that help you to put food on the table for you and your family? Like, now might be the time. It's funny. A friend of mine, she's a big runner, and so am I. And I saw her the other day, and she's like, practicing this AI stuff has become my new exercise. And I'm like, so she swapped out running for the last 6 months and swapped in that same amount of time. She gets up at 3:30 in the morning. She runs for 2 hours. She has put 2 hours in every morning
Brain work.
on AI, the brain work, because she's like, it will not happen during the middle of my day. My boss has got me in too many meetings and stuff. So if I'm willing to take that time to improve my physical, I might need to improve my mental on like my learnings here, so that I'm not getting caught by somebody being in the bottom 10 or 20% of adopters. Because that could happen in 5 years. And if you're in the bottom 10 or 20%, good luck getting a job.
I'll give you a hack on that time thing, is that for me personally, when I want to research or try something new or learn something, I'll find what projects are our passion projects, our favorite projects, or even our own projects. My podcast, for example, I test every type of technology I can that relates to a podcast. Like if I need to revoice something I said, I'll go work on 11 labs to see how close my voice is to replacing myself. If there's new editing tools, now's my excuse to play with editing tools. I don't just do it because it's a new shiny thing. I figure out how can I apply it while I'm learning it.
I do the same thing. I gotta be careful because I'm by my nature a geek. So, like I'll go a little deeper onto script than I need to. I'll go a little bit deeper in Canva than I need to. But you know what? I come out of that knowing how this works.
Yeah.
So now when I'm in a meeting, I can't be with. Oh, well, that's going to take a week. No, I'll just do it. I'll do it by the end of the day today. And then all of a sudden, after I stack up enough of those, why do I need you? Like, what are you doing here? Right.
Yeah.
And I think that people don't get it. Like, so it's the thing I take most seriously because, I put my head on the pillow at night and I got to feel comfortable about what I put in the world. And I am constantly internally being like, guys, it is nothing I take more seriously than making sure that you guys are all set up to be ready for this future state that I can see coming. Because some companies are going to grow at that time, right? Some companies are going to be growing at that time, and I'd like to be one of them. But, I do see a world where too many people have probably held on to the way they used to do things for too long, and they haven't challenged themselves or they haven't put in the reps. And the problem is, can you imagine dragging your feet for a year on AI and competing with my friend that's been getting up every day for 2 hours and practicing it the same way she used to run at 3:30? So now she's got 2 hours per day, probably more, because it's just part of her job too. She's probably got 5-6 hours a day that she's putting into AI that you're putting one in. Well, if she wants your job, nobody's hiring, not asking questions about AI anymore. Right. So they're going to hire, they're going to ask questions. I mean, she's like, oh, I built this thing in Claude and, in Claude's projects or whatever it's called, I forget what it is. And I built it in ChatGPT. And let me tell you about the differences between the two.
That's
and someone shows up like using somebody's prepackaged ChatGPT, custom GPT. You're like, well, did you build this? Oh, no, I found it on blah, 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 blah. You're like, yeah, well, somebody else was getting up doing the reps. And by that point, when you can't put food on the table for your family anymore, you are 2 hours behind every day for an entire year. That's 600 hours. Good luck trying to catch up to them. But the thing is, the encouraging part is it's not that hard right now. Like
right now,
I literally showed somebody something. It took me like weeks to figure out. She copied it, and 3 hours later, she had it running. And I'm like, better than mine was. And it's like, right.
I
so
saw your recent video. It may have been yesterday even, where you were, tell me which one it was. You were, it was interacting with you, watching your screen and guiding you through GA4. Which one was that?
That was a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. It's on Google Real Time. So it's the real time streaming. It's like Google Gemini 2.0 real time or 2.0 streaming that it was.
See, that's one of those posts where I say, okay, let me save this one. I need to go deeper into this, find out what Wil said and how can I go deeper into it myself. And as we mentioned earlier, determine this shiny object. How much time do I spend on this? But I've already determined that this is something that for things that we can't automate through APIs, I'm willing to buy a $300 laptop and let it sit there and automate that way by visual if I can't write the code to do it.
So the other thing that you're saying there too, that's very different, and I think people have to start to think this way is, people have said to me things like, oh, well, we can't do that for this reason or that reason. I'm like, did you hire somebody to just like transform that data for you? Like, oh, go on a Fiverr. You didn't find somebody who you can pay $50 to move that task forward. Like instead you're going to come to me. So you're going to wait 2 weeks to get on my schedule. You're going to get on my schedule and tell me like, oh, well, I've been waiting to tell you that I can't get this data moved from here to there. I'm like, well, did you go to Fiverr? Did you hire somebody to do that? Well, I didn't know if I had budget. It's like, it's $50. Like go. In the same way that you're like, I'll buy a separate computer to run this thing so I can keep things moving. I think we're all going to have to get a little bit better at not accepting the first no. It's like, I've always said like the limit to your greatness is how quickly you accept the first no. That'll always be the limit. And if you're the kind of person that like, oh, well, that can't be done. Oh, my company didn't let me use ChatGPT. All right, well, what keeps you from firing up a hotspot and bringing your custom laptop in and being off the corporate network?
Yeah.
Oh, my company's not paying for me to get GPT Pro, so you're not going to pay that? You got to put food on your family's plate in a couple
Compare that
years.
to a tuition. It's like $20-$30 a month compared to what it would cost you to go to a school and pay a tuition to learn those things. That money seems so small.
The tuition. How about who drinks the bar?
Yeah.
Like you'll pay DoorDash fees out the ass, but you won't self-improve like on your own. Like how much did you spend on DoorDash? How many freaking $8 IPAs did you have tipping people? How many times did you take an Uber because you don't want to sit on the bus because you feel some kind of way about that? All that is the dollars that you could have deployed into your own education, your own future security, but you won't because you're waiting for the company to pay for it. That don't make no sense. There's not going to be room for people like that because the younger people are hungrier. And they're like, yeah, well, all that knowledge that you got, 25 years SEO. They're like, a lot of it is not even that useful. And the cool part is, as an SEO who's been doing this for 25 years, we're used to that. That's why I think some of us have an opportunity to be like, because the stuff that I did 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it don't work no more. And I'm used to that. Like, every few years you got to reinvent because like Google knocks these stuff out. This thing don't work. That thing don't work anymore. So like you also got to look for people that are very comfortable reinventing themselves versus being like, this is my skill set and I got really good at doing it this way. It's like, but this world is changing so fast that you've got to have a comfort level with being like, all right, I'll jump into that. I'll figure it out. Like it's figure outable. Like it might take me some work, but then that's where the reps come in. Oh, the world's not just search anymore. All right, well, people are starting to use LLMs. Yeah. All right, well, my clients are still on SEO contracts. So I got 45 hours of work just doing that. It's like, yeah, but when the person that's putting the 5 hours in, getting up once a day, putting an extra hour in after work or whatever, like how long are you going to wait? Because every hour they stack up over a year, it's real time. Now, I would say you can get to the end of a year and maybe try to catch up to them in half the time, but that's still 150 hours. How are you going to find 150 extra hours at the end of the year? Like, that's really hard, dog. Like, to find an extra 150 hours for somebody that's been going an extra hour? Yeah, so they spent 365. You could probably catch them in 150, but that's still a lot of hours.
Well, you mentioned innovation. I know that's your thing. That's what your main goal is at your company. So tell us about SEER Interactive. That's a company, right?
Yeah.
And how it came about, what you do, what kind of clients you serve.
Sure. So the reason why I tend to focus on innovation because it's my natural state. It's where I create the most value for the company, right? You get me in a meeting talking about margins, I'm zoned out. Like I'm not interested in the financial side of the business. I never really have been because I found something I really love to do. And I'm just like grateful that I have a thing that I love to do, right? It just so happened that it also performed well and I was able to step out, which a lot of people can't do. And I let other people run the company because they're better at it than I am. But if they come into my zone where I'm strong, I'm not strong on many things. I'm strong on very few things, but the few things I'm strong on create a lot of value. So I move myself into this director of innovation role where I am literally like no direct reports. I'm just working on innovation because it's my natural state, right? You could put me full time on finance and it would take me forever to get anything done because my brain doesn't naturally work that way. So that's where I'm at in the company today. the way it started, it has a lot to do with community impact. So I went to school to be a teacher, and I was volunteering at a children's hospital, when I was working at my old company. And I said to my boss, yo, can I like work through my lunch? This is back in like 2000, 2001. So if you were a corporate then, right, like you work through your lunch and leave early to volunteer was kind of like, nah, I was lucky to have dress down Fridays where you could wear
Yeah.
jeans, right?
That was a big perk.
Right. So, it's a different time, right, bro? So, I was in that environment corporately in Fortune 500. So I said to my boss, hey, can I work through my lunch so that I can get to my volunteer assignment, on time? Because I had been showing up a little bit late because the traffic was horrible to get from my office to this hospital, this children's hospital. And my boss at the time, she's like, we can't do it this quarter because of whatever. And I was like, all right, bet, call my mom. And I'm like, I'm going to have to probably start my own business because I believe that we all as humans have a responsibility to these other humans in our society. And if my company won't let me work through my lunch, which I used to use that lunch to complain about my boss anyway, right? Because you know what it's like when you're corporate, you're like, I'm going to eat here at the cafeteria and sit around these other four miserable, and we're all going to complain about our boss, right? That's what we're going to do, right? So I'm like, I'm just using that time to talk on you. Why don't I'm trying to move that time into a positive direction. I can't say that to her, obviously, but it's like, I'm trying to move that into a positive direction and I'm not getting that. So I called my mom up. I'm like, I think I'm about to start my own thing because I think these two things can exist. I believe you can be good in your community and you can grow a fast growth tech company too. Like these things can mutually exist. And I want to be one of the people to show that it's possible. So my mom was like, what you gonna do about health insurance? If you got a black mom, right? She's like, wait, we sent you to school. Like, you need to work at a big company with health insurance, boy. What you doing, right? So she wasn't really about it, but she was like, all right, your sister called me and told me that if anybody was going to pull this off, it was going to be you. So, go ahead and give it a shot. And you have my blessing, whatever, and that's how it started. That's how it started. And then it just, it was a bit of an ego hit because I really started my career in 1999 at a digital marketing firm. And that was before I went to the corporate company. And that digital marketing firm, like I went on their door, knocked on their door and got the job. It was like one of those things, right? Like that's another thing I've been trying to tell like a lot of the young people I work with today. And I just recorded a video on this. I'm like, look, like you can't just put your resume in to me. Like, I don't know how to live that life. Like I never just put my resume in anywhere. I always was like, I'm gonna go knock on your door. You're gonna hear my voice. Then like, I want to win. And like, I want to win with you. Right. So let's find a way to win together. Did that, knocked on the door of a company. That's how I got my break-in search. Is I knocked on their door and was like, I think this digital marketing stuff is cool. I'd love to work here. So they gave me the crack. And then I worked there for a few years. And then I went to this corporate company and then I started SEER after that. And the cool thing was when I started it, I was like, you have to accept your offer letter, you had to volunteer at least 3 hours a month in some capacity somewhere. Because my mental was like, if you don't want to put 3 hours of your month into helping other people, then I don't want to put hours of my time helping you because I'm like a teacher by my nature. So I'm very like, yo, let's huddle up. Let's figure this stuff out. Let's be the leaders. I'm competitive, but I'm like a teacher. So I like bringing people together and be like, how can we learn from each other? So I know I'm going to be spending a lot of hours trying to raise you up. And I want you to then put that, to do that in another capacity, right? So yeah, if you didn't want to volunteer, then I didn't want to work with you. So for our first like 50 hires, like you had to like sign that in your offer letter. But then by that time, the company had grown enough to where I could afford lawyers. And they were like, you can't do that. They're like, that's illegal. I was like, damn it. I'm like, but I'm trying to put good in the world. They're like, yeah, you're going to put less good in the world the first time you get sued because somebody said that you forced them to work as part of their offer letter. It's like,
that's free labor.
Free labor. Can't do that, So so I've learned along the way. And now you can see like it's dumb shit like that. That is the reason why I don't run the business because I have a team that I can say, yo, this is what I believe. They're like, all right, we'll find a way to make sure that you don't get your face blown off doing something that's really good in your heart, but then ultimately could open up exposures for you. Because I would just rip and run and be like, I can trust people and blah, 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 blah. And every once in a while, you run into one person or so that was a little bit of a knucklehead and you're like, wow, that could really set us back because I wasn't, I wasn't smart about the way I'm trying to put good into the world sometimes.
So tell me, typically people start off podcasts with the credibility line of who they are and what they do. We went straight into the meat of things, but I do want to get a chance to allow the audience to hear, what your expertise is, what SEER does, and, what is the magic sauce and what you guys do. Like, what's special about SEER
You
and what you
know,
do specifically?
yeah. So what we do is we do paid search, SEO, content, analytics for the most part. And now we're trying to figure out this generative AI thing, right? And what that means. I like helping people to find things. If you've ever been like a great hotel or something, the concierge like listens to your problem and goes, all right, I know what you and your wife, you're all going to enjoy this spot. Like, let me tell you, right? So there's something about me that loves that aspect of helping people to find good answers on the internet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, wherever, if you're on social and you're asking questions on social, like I want to be able to listen into that and understand what people are saying and what are they recommending. And then like that's going to affect how I'm going to do my content, my SEO, my paid search, my ads, etc. Right. So I really like that. And then that led us to being like a kind of like a big data agency, because what you start realizing is these freaking agencies are siloed as hell. If you type in the word tarjetas de crédito, it's obviously a Spanish word, right? All the ads are in English. Why? Because Google's making money off of all those big banks sitting there showing English ads to a query that they know is in Spanish because all the organic results are in Spanish. You're like, so how is it that the organic results are in Spanish, but the paid aren't? And you're like, how does this continue to perpetuate? Because paid marketers never use organic signals to help them do a goddamn thing. They go in there and they put it in, they go, the AI figured it out, and they're getting ripped off, right? Whereas like, so what we realized years ago is like, if you could bring together the data across these disciplines, you're going to have unique insights that help your client to better speak in the language of their customers, right? Like you don't really want an SEO picking all your keywords if you're doing paid. If you're doing paid, why wouldn't you go to your paid search terms and see what your customer is saying in their own voice? Like, why would I let you pick out my keywords when I can listen to my customer in their own voice, how they are solving this problem and how they believe this problem is solved? If I'm doing paid, I get to capture all those search terms. Why would I not use that in all these different places to help me better connect with my customer? So that's the thing I think that we do really well. And I think the thing that I'm looking forward to us being great at is the bridge from people searching for answers in things like search engines and moving more to LinkedIn, private networks, WhatsApp groups. And this is why I think people keep looking at the search to AI disruption. And I'm thinking it's the search to AI kind of, but ultimately to the human disruption. Because most questions that I have, I can Google them. And AI is better because it answers them better than Google does. But really, it's still like the average answer for the average person asking the average question and putting in these things.
It's very high. Recently,
wouldn't it be better for me to ask a friend?
I think I saw you mention about the closed groups recently, and what came to mind was I was looking for a particular software, and I'd done the Google. I found like the top 4 or 5 that I kind of narrowed it down to, but I did not make a decision. I went to my Discord group of marketers who do the same thing I do and said, hey, I've narrowed down to 3 or 4. Who's used these? Did I miss any? Give me some suggestions. I would not make a decision without those people, and none of that information is trackable.
So like, that's what I'm saying, right? Like, so we got to start looking at like, all right, like Discord traffic, how does it show up? Does it not show up? What's trackable? Is it not trackable? Like Slack data, how do I get that? WhatsApp data, how do I understand how many people are going there? Like that is like the boom moment. It's like, you don't understand. You can put all this crap out in marketing. At the end of the day, if there's any real consequences to the decision you're about to make, whether it's time or money, you're going to ask a human at some point in that process. And these tools have gotten so good that you're now in private WhatsApp groups, private LinkedIn groups. If you have a good LinkedIn following, you can go there. So you're like, before I make this decision, why wouldn't I ask, is anybody in my network using Monday? Is anybody in my network using this tool before I switch over? You'd be crazy not to do that, right? So now that our networks have gotten digitally closer, you'd be crazy not to. And I'll tell you, some decisions aren't made at all on those platforms on search at all. People just get like the early search and then they're just like off and doing the next. And some of these decisions are being made completely in these private groups. I'm looking for a recommendation for a company. I got no idea if my company's being mentioned or not there, right? So yeah, that's going to be the dude. I think there's extreme value in people today starting to take a little bit more seriously helping as many people as they can on these platforms and putting as much as they can out there that's truly helpful, not some Gen AI written shit, right? It's the stuff that people really want to bookmark and like be like, that's a different perspective. Like, because what's going to happen is with that influence, there are so many other pockets you can go in. So for instance, I index every person that likes or comments on any of my LinkedIn posts, and I pull in their LinkedIn profile. So now when lead forms are submitted, I'm building a make automation to basically look through every time a lead form is submitted for any of my deals are lost, and then track that person to see if they like any of my content. Because you're like, oh, if I lost a deal with you last year and you've liked 3 of my last pieces of content on XYZ topic, then like I probably could reach back out to you and talk to you about those things. Most marketers have no idea that you can do that, right? They're like, wait, how are you pulling in each person that commented or liked on each one of your things? You're like, you gotta want to go get it. It's out there, right? There's tools like Phantom Buster and Shield and other tools that'll get you that intel. So now all of a sudden you can be like, who are the people that like my AI stuff? Now I got this new AI thing that we just launched. I'm going to go message them and be like, hey, if you read this back then or you commented on this, we got a new product that solves this problem. Now you can go through and try to click on every LinkedIn post you've ever had, looking at all the people and expanding and all that. Mine's sitting in an Airtable so that I can just natural language query that thing and go, all the people who commented with this kind of a comment, find all of them. And now based on that, help me to write starter copy for my emails to them. And then I'm going to get that. And then I'm going to use that as my foundation for each person I'm going to follow up with. I never send out anything Gen AI with my name on it, ever.
That is so actionable, because I'll tell you where I'm at. I'm at a very, I would say, in my view, a junior level of that, because what I do is I think about all the things you said in terms of who's liking, who's commenting on things, but the content we create, the first focus is being valuable. Like if I create a piece of content that is valuable to my audience, there's some part of me that says, I'm not going to spend time trying to measure it, because if it's good, they will come to me. Now, I know there's some ignorance in there probably, but do I spend 5 hours in automations and spreadsheets and exporting and importing and analyzing, or do I spend that 5 hours creating the content that I know brings customers?
Oh, it's like taking the temperature. Like, you know, if something is going to take or not, you know, if something was creating value or not, right? Like you kind of start to intuit, but the more you put out, the more you start to intuit, right? Like, oh man, this ain't moving. Like, I must have missed something, right? So to me, you're absolutely right. Not enough people are even doing that. But how do you gain that intuition on what created value and what didn't? You got to put more out there. Now, the problem is especially in our world, I would say 60% of the people that follow me, 70% of people that follow me work in agencies. And to this day, SEER doesn't have agencies as clients. So then you have to kind of mentally be a little bit like, like I might get less engagement on this one, but this one's more about people looking for enterprise, blah, 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 blah solutions or whatever. So that one might get less take, but it's not some hot take that's applicable to everybody. So you do have to kind of think through like, who's this post for? And then you almost have to mentally adjust. Like the numbers might not be as high, but the people who did engage with it might be the exact kind of target audience. But the other thing is people don't want to admit, we all hate looking at our baby and saying it's ugly, right? So I think too many of us, we put content out and have a hard time looking back at it and be like, that thing that I thought was a banger wasn't. So what can I learn from that? What did I try to do? So for me, like for instance, I haven't shared this. I will at some point, but like I've gotten so good at sitting on LinkedIn now that I know within about 15 minutes whether or not the post is going to take, because I can see LinkedIn starts to give you more and less visibility super quick. So I have enough of a following that for me, it's kind of like that unfair thing that when like, I had a friend who was doing A/B tests for YouTube's homepage, and he was like, oh, every test runs in like 30 seconds. Like you have a statistically significant sample in 30 seconds. So it's just unfair, right? So the more followers you have, the more, if you just sit there for like, for me, if I post something, sit there for 15 minutes, I know exactly if it's going to end up at the high, middle, or the low end instantly, right? So if it starts off super low and I know it's going to be low, before I put that anywhere else, I try a completely different strategy on that same piece of content. So now I'm like, all right, like my followers are super low on Blue Sky or Twitter, but I still mentally know what their numbers typically look like given my following. So then you're like, man, that thing sucked on LinkedIn. I missed it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a totally different pivot on the same post, put it on Twitter, failed there. New pivot, put it on Threads, failed there. That idea sucked. Don't go back to it or rebuild it in a totally different way. But sometimes what you find is like, oh, that did take off somewhere else. So humans do like that. I just maybe did something that LinkedIn didn't like post my third post in a day. Maybe I did a type of image that they don't like as much. Maybe I use a kind of thing that they don't like as much. So that's how you start to build your acumen on
You
how
said a
those things
key
work.
thing a moment ago, though. You mentioned the who, like who's looking at it. I had a video last week that took off. It had like 20,000 impressions in a few minutes. I was like, wow, that's great. It's a nice spike. But they were all the wrong people. They were people who just LinkedIn decided to just give me a boost. At the same time, I had another post maybe the day before. I only had a few hundred, but they were all client profiles. So I'm like, I'd rather have those 100 than those 20,000 any day.
Yeah, but you know what? That's mental though, right? Because like we attach so much of our value to these likes and that like, you start being like, oh, that one took off. And then a lot of people literally fall for that and start writing more stuff like that. And it's like, oh no, there's a formula for that. All I gotta do is put a picture of my kids and talk about like how I became like girl dad and like I gave up
Yeah.
my career and I was working too hard and blah, blah, blah. And now I had this epiphany and now life's all about, me taking time for me and my kids, right? If I say that, I'm gonna get all the likes in the world, right?
Yeah. I've had to
And I think,
unfollow so many hackers, people who have
right,
LinkedIn hacks because their goal is to get the numbers. My goal is to get the clients. It's a whole different scenario.
it depends on how you get your check. Like I don't get my check off of likes. Ain't nobody ever
Yeah.
done that. But what's nice though, to be real with you too, is I try to put out enough stuff because I don't want to just be some like, I don't know. I just don't want to be some like CEO-ish dude. Like I'm like, yo, I got a family. Like I'm trying to figure out how to be a good dad and yada yada yada. So there's a space for that, but it's not some hacky trying to get likes.
Yeah.
It's
It's you
more
being
like
you, real.
it's me being me, right? Which is another thing that I think that people also are going to struggle with a bit is like these days you got to build. I don't mean to build a brand because I hate the word personal branding, just because it's like broadly for me, it just never was a thing. Because I think about my mom, dad, like they didn't think about their personal brands, like kind of some newfalutin, right? It's like back in the day, you went to work, you tried to do right by your family and your kids, and that's what you did. So I struggle with it, but I've kind of come to the grips that like I'm like influencer now. I hate to say it. I hate to think of it that way. I hate to say it, but it's like it'd be disingenuous for me to sit here across from you and act like having that size of a followership and these kind of metrics that sometimes come across some of the things that I put out there and these kind of connections and be like, oh, I don't, I might not be sitting around trying to manicure a brand because that's not my style. I'm like, yo, I'm me. If you don't like it, like that's cool. Like, you know where the unfollow button is. But my goal is to bring in a value that you're like, even with his quirky, I'm still willing to put up with this guy.
If it
Right.
happens
But
organically, if the brand happens because you're you, that's how it's supposed to happen, not you setting out to be a brand. In fact, we all know people who built brands with nothing under it, and then like a flame, poof, they disappeared because all they had was a brand, nothing under it.
well, I mean, the sad part is what I every so often I will follow a person specifically to see when they fall off. Because what's real interesting, right? Because when you live in an algorithmic world, the person that was crushing it and doing all this stuff, they just stop posting as much, and you don't realize it as a consumer because LinkedIn just replaced them with another jamoke that's like crushing it. So then you don't realize this person that you admired or you thought was all great and whatnot, like they just stop posting about that stuff, or because at some point the chickens are gonna come home to roost, so they got to stop faking the funk, and at some point they just post a lot less, or they're holding on to some award they won 20 years ago, put that in their
There
little
are so many
bio.
LinkedIn influencers who I
It's
held in high
whack.
regard for a long time. And then I realized while I'm building substantial experience and relationships and not getting all that attention they're getting, those are like solid bricks under my what's become a brand. It's who I really am, and it can't be put out that quickly like a flame. I mean, it is what it is. It's not that easily doused, I guess I'm trying to say.
No, it's I don't know, man. Like for me, it is one of those things where I literally sit there sometimes and I'm like, I even try to question myself because you can change your religion after like the business does well. The beauty of blogging since the time I started this publicly, when I didn't have, we always did fine, but I didn't have as much, is I can look back at things that I said about entrepreneurship and running a business 20 years ago, 16, 17 years ago. And I read them and I'm like, back then I got a post on my old blog that's like, entrepreneurship is a self-congratulatory circle jerk. So I thought the same we're saying now 15 years ago. And sometimes you got to check yourself, be like, it's easy that now that it's worked for me to now have a belief system that's like, yo, like, yeah, man, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, you got the bag. What were you doing back then? And I'm like, I thought the same back then.
Doesn't it feel good to check yourself and go, you know what? I'm consistent.
The lies we tell ourselves are crazy. I got caught in one. So I've always been like, I went to school to be a teacher. That is a fact. And the story I would tell people, which is where I'm going in the next call, is I meet with all my new employees and tell them the story of how I founded the company and why it matters. The story I used to tell all these new people at SEER is, I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I used to put it all over the internet. Oh, I'm an accidental entrepreneur. Like, I went to school to be a teacher, right? So the story I've been telling myself is like, I'm not like these other people. I started off, I was cursing, I was doing all this stuff. I ain't like these people, right? They're not my people. My mom was cleaning out my high school, I was cleaning out my closet at the house. And this was like 2 years ago. And she's like, oh, I got your yearbook. What do you want to do with it? I'm like, oh, just hold on to it. Let me come get it. I just want to read through it, right? I freaking read, like, where do you want to be in like 20 years? And it said, start a business with my boy Bill, who's my best friend, right? And I was like, damn, I've been telling people this story that like, I didn't want to start this. And I'm looking at it like, well, if I want to start a business, why would I go to school to be a teacher? Right. So like in my mind, like I had forgotten that there was a part of me in high school that really thought that. So even for us, right, it's like nice to have those artifacts that let you go back and check yourself. Because sometimes you can't even remember when people are early in their businesses, they'll be like, Will, give me advice on being 5 people. I'm like, nah, I can't do that because whatever I tell you is made up. Like it might be accurate. It might be wrong because I can't reflect on those days because it's been 1,000 employees later. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So you're like, I can't actually honestly tell you what it was like hiring my first employee because I have forgotten it because I've now hired 900 and some other people after that, Well, before you go, I really want to give you a chance to tell us about some of your causes and some of the things that we can support. Sure. So I came on pretty hot talking about AI. I think the most important thing all of us can do, find a young person to mentor because they're the ones that are really going to they have an opportunity, but it also can be risky. There's a lot of grant funding and stuff in helping inner city young kids learn to code. You just heard Zuckerberg the other day be like, yeah, we think all our code's going to be written in the next number of years by AI for the most part, right? So it's like, I think there's a lot of grant money there and a lot of people are like, oh, look at this grant money, learn to code to our young kids in the inner city, black, brown, poor, whatever, I don't care, right? But it's like people that grew up like me. And I think that we all need to try to pick 1 or 2 of those kids up under our wing. They can be hard to find sometimes because kids will flap their lips and sound right. And then when it really comes down to being about that life, they're not really willing to put in the work. But I've now found some of those young folks and I'm trying to put them on a path of building out custom GPTs and whatnot and watch me build this and let me send you a video on what I built just so that I can try to put them in that direction. So that's the thing that I would say more than anything. And then next year will be the 25th anniversary of the Covenant House's sleep outs that we do, where I sleep outside to raise money for homeless youth in Philadelphia. So if by some stretch somebody's listening to this a year from now wants to make a donation, not a year, probably, we sleep outside in November. So, 11 months from now, maybe we can promote it again then. I would love the support. Awesome. So where can they find you, SEER, and your causes? Google me, man. Like you'll find it. I'm out there with you'll see me. If they can't find you, you're not doing your job, right? That's what I always used to say, brother. That's right. So Will, thanks again for your time, man. I really appreciate it. And thanks to the listeners. If you're listening to the podcast and want to also see Will and I, video of the podcast and others will be available in the podcast section of contentmonster.com. Once again, thanks for listening. Thanks, Will.
Thank you for listening to the Business of Marketing podcast, a show brought to you by contentmonster.com, the producer of B2B digital marketing content. Show notes can be found on contentmonster.com, as well as aleejudge.com. To continue the conversation, be sure to follow the podcast on your favorite podcast platform.